lounging in the treetop of a great goldbark to the sound of bog imps and grey toads, munching from a plastic bag of toffee his mother had made, Ekrem was happy. He could see the skyscrapers of Yeni Bodrum to the north, and the tall towers of Batak to the south, looming over the waters and islands of the swamp. A cargo airship was passing over a dense grove of smaller goldbark trees, carrying colourful containers that looked like they were unsuspended and about to fall at any moment. But Ekrem had seen the thin lattice keeping them in place once when another airship passed right over this very tree. He knew the secret, though he was still fascinated by it. How could struts thinner than his arms hold dozens of containers? "Look, there's one over there," Simia shouted, pointing from his branch in the tree. Ekrem turned around and stretched his neck to see, and there it was. A sparkling cloud of arctic blue spores, ascending from the green crowns, swirling and twisting in the wind, transforming into a 1,000-legged amoeba before dissipating into the air. It was pollen season for the ice blossom vine, and clouds like that one were appearing all over the swamp. Ekrem and his friends came to the big goldbark tree every day after school to look for them. Urgent clicking resounded from the ground, closing in as Kansu, Ekrem's pet mask dog, scaled the tree with his obsidian black biforked claws. It was a rare animal, a stalking quadruped slightly smaller than an alligator, with thick, pearl-colored skin, a strong tail, and fluorescent teal eyes without pupils, encased in an oval mask of charcoal bone. Ekrem's father had found Kansu as a cub while working, and brought him home when the boy was only 2 years old. The masked dog pointed his head toward a nearby strip of land. Ekrem didn't notice at first, but there, between the trees, a man was pushing a battered canoe through the water with a big stick. His clothes looked strange. He had to have lost his paddle, as nobody used a pushing stick unless they really had to, and he was horrible at using it. Like a little child, he constantly pushed into weak roots, long branches, and even the underbrush. When there was a patch of land ahead of him, he tried to somehow pull his boat forward, and it seemed like he was trying to move sideways more often than ahead. In fact, most little children Ekrem knew were much better at canoeing than this grown-up man. A giant barklicker hornet darted around a mangrove trunk and flew towards him. He tried to hit it with his pushing stick, instead of just spitting at it like any sane person would have done. In a matter of seconds, Ekrem and his friends climbed down the goldbark tree and jumped into their own canoes. Semir and Hakan shared the blue one, while Ekrem and Dilan had to take the green one. Tomorrow they would switch again, so it was fair. Kansu sprinted straight into the water. He would follow them under the surface, skimming the ground and climbing along underwater roots and vines. The man shouted in fear as the hornet let out its whizzing battle cry and hit it on the head. It dropped into the water like a rock, but he somehow looked relieved. Had he never fended off a giant barklicker hornet before? Ekrem and his friends paddled hard. He might be an idiot, but the man needed help, and helping people was always the good thing to do. Exhausted, he collapsed in his boat, unaware of the two approaching canoes. "Careful!" shouted Semir, and the man looked up, frowning. The hornet had climbed out of the water and was scaling the outer hull of his canoe. Quick as lightning, it zapped over the side. He screamed, grabbed his pushing stick but threw it away, then jumped out of his boat, finding slippery footing on the roots of a goldbark tree, clinging to its lower hanging branches for halt. The canoe almost capsized, and the man was very lucky it didn't. Its wings wet, the hornet was now trapped in there, and could not pursue him any further. The kids arrived just in time, and Ekrem realized that the strange clothing on the man was something he'd seen on streamcasts before. A suit. Important people wore them all the time, and to Ekrem it seemed very impractical. Why wear jackets in summer, especially black ones? Black was a very hot color to wear outdoors. This man's suit was a little different, however. Not only was it ripped and dirty, but it had no embroideries. The jacket had buttons, but they were unfastened, and there was a strange blue piece of cloth dangling from the man's neck. He wasn't just not wearing a turban, he was wearing no hat at all. Shaking, the strange man stepped into the green canoe with Ekrem and Dilan, almost slipping and falling into the water after all. Semir and Hakan pulled up next to the man's boat and began spitting at the Barklicker hornet, causing it to curl up in a corner and go into a rigger. "You have to spit at them, like the bog imps do," said Dilan. "It makes them scared." The man looked confused, but also relieved. He nodded and thanked them, falling silent for a few moments while the kids looked at him. Normally, grown-ups would say something at this point, tell the kids what to do, but he was just lost in the swamp. They decided to take the man to Ekrem's house, as it was the nearest one. Dilan's house was bigger, but she claimed her parents wouldn't take anyone in, and the other kids agreed that Ekrem's parents were the friendliest, so they would take the man in and not castigate anyone for it. Ekrem was surprised that the other kids even considered their parents would punish them for doing the right thing. His friend's parents could be harsh at times, but did they not have to do good deeds for Allah and the Prophet? It turned out the man's name was Ufrat, and he spoke in a very strange manner. It wasn't like he didn't know Turkish properly, like the Chinese people down by Yellow Island, but he said many words in a different way. He didn't talk much and seemed very exhausted, staring into the water with empty eyes. Once he jerked up and gasped, but it was only because Kansu had dipped through the surface. Ekrem lived in a 2-storied house made of wood and plastic bricks, on a platform propped up by 5 titanium stilts. It was so high up in the air that his father could easily fit under it standing up. Ekrem grabbed the mooring line of the green boat and climbed up the ladder to tie it down on the porch. Kansu followed right behind him, rolling himself up in the little tub by the front door. Ufrat had to be beckoned upstairs to even get in motion, and he did not look very pleased. The kids decided to meet at school the next day, so Dilan jumped in the blue canoe with Hakan and Semir, and they paddled away. "Mama, I'm home!" shouted Ekrem, and his mother looked out the upstairs window. Upon seeing Ufrat, she squinted with suspicion. "Who is that man?" she asked. "His name is Ufrat. We found him in the swamp," Ekrem responded. Ufrat smiled but didn't look happy at all. Ekrem helped his mother make some flatbread with ayva for their guest, whose stomach he could hear rumbling in the living room. His mother insisted they not cook yet, but let the man stay for dinner later, so father could decide what was to be done with them. Ufrat only spoke little, but he downed his meal like it was the first thing he'd eaten in months. He fell asleep on the sofa almost immediately afterwards, underneath the plaque that said, "He who believes in Allah and the Last Day should accommodate his guest according to his right in Arabic." Ekrem's Arabic was not very good, but he knew this sentence, because his father had taught it to him for as long as he could remember. He watched Mr. Ufrat for a while, until he got bored and asked his mother if he could watch some streamcasts on the datapad. His father's homecoming was announced by the roaring of his motorized boat, but Ufrat did not wake up. He'd been asleep for 3 hours now. He didn't wake up when grandfather Hashim came back from town either, even after he laid back in his lounging chair and started watching the newscast in the living room. Ekrem had to stop using the datapad because their connection only allowed one stream at a time without lagging. Only when the smell of dinner spread throughout the house, Ufrat woke up and asked for directions to the bathroom. The dinner table was set with fresh peppered simit bread, lamb cubes, sunfish and locust paste, sweetened yogurt with dried moss and livergrass, and pide pouches filled with blue pear, olives, and Tulum cheese. Once again, Ufrat ate like he was about to starve, and kept congratulating his mother on her cooking skills. He was reluctant to take seconds, but seemed glad when she insisted he do so. Meanwhile, his father was trying to make friendly conversation. "Where are you from, Mr. Ufrat?" he asked, dipping his bread into the sweetened yogurt. Ilksehir. It's the city on Eregli 2. Grandfather Hashim puffed and gave Ufrat a scolding look. I knew it. Only a Kemalist would run around a swamp in a suit. Did you come here to spread your depravity? Ufrat raised his hands. I am terribly sorry to have offended you, sir. Yes, I am from a colony that is dedicated to the ideals of Atatürk. But I believe in the unity of all Turks. We are not Turks. Hashim slammed his fist on the table. We are Ottomans. Hashim, Ekrem's father scolded. This man is our guest. We must treat him with respect. He turned back to Ufrat. Forgive my father. He's a very proud patriot. What is your profession? Ekrem noticed that his father was using longer words than usual. He had to think for a moment to remember what profession even meant. I'm a civil engineer. I build bridges and other infrastructure. Well, really, I only designed them. These hands aren't made for building. He raised his hands, and they were indeed thin and smooth-skinned, albeit a little blistered right now. I was hired to build a big... He paused for a moment. They want to build a new highway exchange in Yeni Bodrum. What is it you do for a living? Father waved him off. Oh, I'm just a sugarcane farmer. Me and my friend Hakan oversee the workers and the drones on the fields to the east. Hakan had been his father's friend since they were little, Ekrem knew. His own friend, who was also named Hakan, was his father's friend's son. Well, you're doing good work. Sugar from this planet is famed on many worlds, my own included. I've seen your world, Kemalist, Hashim interrupted. I was a Janissary half my life, and we once went to Eregli too. Your city is vile. Big advertisements everywhere. Lights flashing in the night. Married women with no headscarves. Men with completely shaven faces. You have no sultan and no council of imams. And alcohol is sold on the street like tea. You people have no respect for God and the Prophet. There was an unusual moment of silence. Ekrem didn't know what, but something was afoot. Once again, I am terribly sorry if I have caused offense to you, sir. I am a practicing Muslim. I believe in the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. For some reason, Ufrat looked scared. Grandfather Hashim could be scary at times, but Ekrem knew he was a very nice man at heart. This was not the first time he was complaining about the Kemalists, though judging from his past descriptions of them, Ekrem had expected them to be wicked defilers with no respect for God and his people. He didn't even know a Kemalist could be a Muslim. Grandfather always said that all Kemalists hated Islam. Will you hold the Isha prayer with us tonight then, Mr. Ufrat? Asked his father, ignoring Hashim's angry look. It would be an absolute honor to pray with all of you. Definitely, yes, Ufrat responded. Why were you in the swamp all by yourself? You must have been on the move for at least a day if you came from Yeni Bodrum. And you clearly don't know what you're doing, asked Hashim. Yes, I was lost, in all honesty. I went to a park yesterday, and it changed into wild swamp so seamlessly I didn't even realize it. Allah helped me in finding a canoe, but the swamp is very difficult to navigate. Had your grandson not found me, mister, I think I would have starved or been eaten by an alligator. Maybe both. And you did not see the two skylines to the north and south, respectively? Hashim probed. Ekrem only half understood why he was being so mean to Ufrat. Sir, I was scared. I don't know how to get around the swamp. I'm used to flying graph cars and getting my food in shopping malls. Out here, I'm helpless. Ufrat seemed almost apologetic. Well, if you need to get back to Yeni Bodrum, I'm sure you can catch a ride on one of our cargo liners that go up there from the processing plant tomorrow, his father offered. Thank you, but I can't go back to the city. The project I'm working on was cancelled, and my company wants me to return home. Well then, you'll still have to go back to Yeni Bodrum. They have a very large spaceport, and you'll be on a flight to Eregli 2 in no time at all, father insisted. That is true, but my company has a weird policy of not using big spaceports. Is there maybe something more rural that can get me into orbit? Hashim squinted at Ufrat. He was suspicious of their guest, but he didn't want to provoke Ekrem's father any further. It wouldn't be the first time he'd thrown the old man out for the night. There is a pad for cargo lifters on the farmlands west of here, but even with a motorboat you'd need half a day to get there. If you want to go in a canoe, you'll need 2 days at least, and that's assuming you know your way around. Grandfather scoffed at the notion. I could make it in one if I cleaned up my kayak, but the Kamalis could never get there even if you wanted to. Father gave Hashim a scornful look. Chanting resounded through the swamp. It was the Adhan, coming from the minaret in town, being transmitted to several speakers installed in the treetops near houses. It was time for the last prayer of the day. They all hurried to the living room and rolled out their praying mats, except Ufrat, who didn't have one. Mother turned on the projector and a live stream of the Kaaba appeared on the wall. As always, it was being circled by thousands upon thousands of people. Ekrem often wondered if they were always the same people. Mecca was supposed to be a huge city, greater than Yeni Bodrum and Batakşehir put together, so for people to live there it would only be natural to go and pray at the Kaaba. But grandfather insisted it was different people every time. All Muslims had to make the Hajj in their life and visit the Kaaba, and Hashim had been there himself while serving with the Janissaries. But seeing so many people every day just didn't add up to Ekrem. There was no way there could be that many of them, even on all the worlds combined. Reciting his prayers, he wondered if Ufrat had ever gone to Mecca. After all, he had to be quite rich to wear a suit. Father always said they would never visit the Kaaba, but God would forgive them because they did not have the money to make the trip to Earth. An entire month of not working and maintaining the house would ruin them, and God was merciful on those who had little. The next day was Friday, and Ekrem was looking forward to the weekend. His father had offered to bring Ufrat to the spaceport in the farmlands with his motorized boat, and Ekrem was allowed to come with. Ufrat had offered money in addition to his countless thanks, but his father had declined. It was wrong to take money for helping someone in need. As every morning, Ekrem paddled to school with grandfather Hashim. It was located in the town center, an island with several buildings on it, including the clinic, which was also Dilan's home, the mosque, the village council, and the tea house, which is where Hashim spent most of his day. Some of the kids living farther out in the swamp, like Semir, were collected with the school boat, which was very fast. Its arrival marked the completeness of the village's 23 students and the beginning of class. First order of the day was calculus, which Ekrem liked because it was either right or wrong. Dilan had problems with adding up the numbers, as did Hakan, but Ekrem and Semir were always so quick that the teacher would give them extra assignments, puzzles to solve on their own. Those were his favorite. Afterwards came Turkish class, where they read stories of Nasreddin out loud and had to write about their meaning. Ekrem liked the stories, at least the funny ones, but writing down their meaning was tedious. It was so obvious what each was about. Many of them were only jokes, and the teacher knew the answers anyway. She must have read them 1,000,000 times. Yet, some of his classmates still got it wrong, and even he seemed to be unable to write exactly what Mrs. Sci-Fi wanted to see. Dilan excelled at this, even though she only used different words to say the same things Ekrem did. He suspected this was because she was a girl, and Mrs. Sci-Fi said that girls were always better at reading than boys. Right before they started with history, the roaring of engines could be heard from outside. Everyone crowded to the window, and saw a massive black gunship set down in the middle of the village square. Arabic and Turkish letters declared that it belonged to the Mutawin, the Islamic police. 3 uniformed men with long beards, machine guns, and dark green takias on their heads climbed out of it, followed by what looked to be a mufti, carrying no weapons but a datapad instead. Not even trying to put the children back in their seats, the teacher hurried outside to ask what was going on. She was shouted at by one of the soldiers and sent right back into the building. Fat Imam Mustafa strode out of the mosque, approaching the Mufti directly. Instead of shouting, the soldiers bowed their heads with respect. He and the Mufti exchanged a few words, and then Mustafa nodded and used his personal comm to broadcast a message over the mosque's speaker system. Everyone is to assemble in the town center as soon as possible, by order of the Mufti Barak of the Mutaween, he ordered, and went back to speaking with the Mufti. The soldiers spread out, walking in between the buildings, demanding people hurry. Minutes later, half the village was out of their houses, looking at the Mutaween and their gunship. Ekrem spotted his grandfather by the tea house, wearing the ceremonial red fez that identified him as a veteran of the Janissaries. The Mufti began speaking in Arabic and, because even most adults didn't have a great understanding of the language, Imam Mustafa translated it into Turkish. We are here on orders of the District Sharia Court of Yeni Bodrum to carry out its justice and seek the aid of good and devout Muslims, he declared. A devil in the skin of a man who chooses to make a mockery out of God's law has escaped from our city. Ekrem's heart skipped a beat. The Mufti's datapad projected a picture of Ufrat in the air. His suit was clean, and his features looked darker somehow, but it was him without a doubt. His mouth was making an evil grin. He is of the sort who lie with other men, a filthy homosexual. The punishment for his crimes against God shall be stoning. If any of you have seen him, let your voice be heard. Ekrem glanced over at Semir and Hakan, who were staring right back at him. If Ufrat was truly what the Mufti said he was, they were in a problematic situation. Homosexuals were bad demons who corrupted people, worshipped the evil one, and existed only to cause harm and insult God. Or at least that's what all the adults thought. It was just like the adults saying that bog-imps turned into child-eating monsters at night. It wasn't true. Ekrem had snuck out often enough to find bog-imps climbing up trees or diving deep when he approached them, just like they did during the day. He also knew that homosexuals were not man-devils, because Hakan and Semir had started being homosexuals last year and they worshipped God and did good deeds, just like before. But adults were often fond of the wrong things they believed, especially when it concerned matters of God and his laws. They had to keep quiet, lest the Mutaween stone his two friends as well. But Grandfather Hashim had no such quarrels. It was clear he hated Ufrat, and this was just a reason to tell on him. Ekrem looked over to the tea house and, just as expected, his grandfather had stepped forward, adjusting his fez. I have something to say, Mufti Barak, he began in Turkish. You will address the Honorable Mufti in Arabic, or you will not address him at all, dotard, one of the soldiers shouted, pointing at Hashim. The Mufti grabbed his soldier by the shoulder and said something to him, looking at his grandfather's fez. Ekrem understood the words Janissary, hero, and respect, but it was too late. Grandfather's lips were already pursed in anger. Every time Ekrem had seen that expression on his grandfather's face, a beating had followed soon after. Instead of shouting, as he would usually do, he said something about a different matter in Arabic and stepped back into the crowd with his elderly tea-drinking friends. Ekrem knew Grandfather Hashim demanded respect for his service as a Janissary, and everyone, including the Imam, gave it to him. His judgment could even overrule the other town elders. This affront he would not tolerate. But instead of making a scene, he swallowed his pride and took a step back, because he was a smart man. If you are disrespected by someone stronger than you, it isn't dishonorable to avoid confrontation. You are in the right, and God will judge them in time, was one of the things he would often say. Now Ekrem knew what it meant. Nobody else knew anything, and the kids didn't talk. Ratting was not allowed. Allah wanted them to stick together and be loyal, Grandfather Hashim always said. The Mufti and his soldiers returned to the gunship and took off, and the crowd dispersed. Everyone had things of their own to do. The teacher beckoned the kids back into class, and school continued as though nothing had happened. In history class, they were taught about the first Ottoman sea ships leaving Earth. They learned that, after the Americans, the Ottomans were the second people of Earth to launch a sea ship. Ekrem often wondered about the Americans, as they appeared often in history class, almost always as the enemy of Islam and the Prophet. How could such an evil people do such great things even before the true believers? When he asked Grandfather Hashim about this, he said that the Americans stole everything from everyone and used sin to motivate their workers. Ekrem had asked why anyone would want to sin if sinning was evil, and Hashim simply said that they, like all kafir, knew sinning was against God but wanted to insult him. That didn't answer his question, but he sensed that asking any further would get him into trouble. Ekrem couldn't concentrate on the teacher's words. All he could think about was Ufrat, who was sitting in the house hiding from the Mutaween. His mother probably knew nothing about it. He wondered what father would do when he found out, because Hashim would surely tell him, if the Mutaween didn't fly by his work themselves. According to the law of God, they had to treat their guest with hospitality, but also according to the law of God, they had to give him over to the Mutaween for being a devil. But Ekrem knew being a gay did not make you a devil. What was he supposed to do now? He couldn't ask any of the adults because all of them would castigate him, even the Imam, who was always such a nice man and brought the children candy. After history and another round of prayers, school was over and the kids made their way home. Ekrem looked for Grandfather Hashim by the tea house, but the clerk said he had left soon after the Mutaween. This was unusual. He always brought Ekrem back from school. Now he would have to go alone, fearing the worst. Mr. Ufrat was in trouble. He paddled home as fast as he could. As soon as he emerged between the trees and saw the house, Kansu climbed into the boat to greet him. After mooring and climbing up the ladder, he saw the old yellow canoe his father kept on the porch was no longer there. Ekrem petted Kansu and sent him back to his bowl, then went inside only to find his mother and Grandfather Hashim already sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for him. Mother was weeping silently, and Grandfather stared at him like he had at that Mutaween soldier.
"You have brought shame and dishonor over this house, boy," he roared. "This house that I built with my own hands. You let a devil in here, an evil being, and now the Mutaween will punish us if they find out."
"But I didn't know," Ekrem complained. "I didn't know he was a gay."
"Shut your mouth, boy. This is all your fault. We have fallen out of God's favor. Tonight, we will pray the alligators get that filthy devil before the Mutaween do, because if they don't, everyone will know of our shame."
Hashim was almost foaming at the mouth. He spat out every word like a bog imp. Ekrem turned to his mother, but when he made one step towards her, she got up and left the room. It was terrible. He felt like his heart had been ripped out, and tears rushed down his face before he even realized he was crying. Why did she leave? This was his mummy. She was always there to comfort a little boy, even when he did something wrong. When he broke their portrait of Suleiman, both father and grandfather had been like this, but his mother had tucked him into bed and given him a hug.
"Oh, you're not going anywhere, boy,"
Grandfather growled when Ekrem went to follow his mother into the living room.
"Your punishment starts here and now, and all of it will hurt."
Hashim took the cane leaning by the cupboard and pointed at an empty chair.
"Lie down on your belly and pull down your pants, boy."
Ekrem could only shake his head. The rest of his body didn't know what to do.
"So you want 10 more lashes, eh? 10 more lashes it'll be."
He stood up, twirling his cane like the trained warrior he was.
"You will do as I say, or it'll be 20 more next time. Now lie on your belly and pull down your pants."
Menacing, snarling and clicking sounds came from the door. Kansu was not allowed in the house because he was always wet and filthy, but Ekrem was glad he had come to protect him.
"Get out!"
Hashim shouted, raising his cane and making a step toward the mask dog. Kansu was not impressed. Quick as lightning, he leapt forward and threw himself headfirst at Grandfather, hitting him in the chest and throwing him on the ground. There was a thump and a crack, and blood started spreading from the back of Grandfather's head onto the broken floor tiles. Ekrem could hear his mother storming over from the living room, but it was as though his legs started moving on their own. He ran outside, Kansu in tow, grabbed Hashim's paddle and climbed down into his kayak. It was very fast and easy to steer, easier even than Ekrem's own canoe. He would have to be fast if he wanted to catch up with Mr. Ufrat. Maybe he could go with him when he used the farmland spaceport, and he could live with Kansu on another world. As he paddled away, Ekrem could hear his mother shouting his name from the porch, begging for him to come back. He couldn't even look at her. It was after sunset when he found Mr. Ufrat in the yellow canoe. He was loud and cursed a lot, so Ekrem heard him from a mile away. The sound of father's motorboat searching for him had disappeared a while ago. It almost caught him the first time. He had to hide in the underbrush, a bog imp whispering into his ear when father passed by. It was therefore a bit surprising that nobody had found Mr. Ufrat, who had no idea how to move silently through the swamp. He didn't even notice Ekrem until he was only a paddle's length away, and when he did, he almost fell into the water from the shock. Ekrem had to assure him that he was not there to rat and take him to the Mutaween, but to help him find his way to the landing pad. It was best not to ask about leaving with him just yet. "What did they tell you, the Mutaween?" "Your grandfather just threw an old paddle at me, launched the boat into the water, and told me to raft as far away as I could, and never talk of your family having taken me in," Mr. Ufrat asked. "They say you're a devil because you're a gay, but don't worry, I don't think that. My friends Simir and Hakan are also gays, and they're good people." Ufrat nodded and smiled, but Ekrem could see the naked fear in his eyes, even in the dim moonlight. "Your family is a good family, even your grandfather. He could have turned me in or killed me himself, but he gave me a chance to flee and survive instead." Ekrem thought it best not to tell Mr. Ufrat that Hashim had hoped for his death out in the swamp. The only reason he was still alive was because God demanded all guests be treated with respect, even the ones that were devils. "You know, I did not really come to this world to build an exchange in Yeni Bodrum," Mr. Ufrat confessed. "I'm here to design a highway that goes over this swamp to connect Yeni Bodrum and Bataksehir. Your village is located on a very firm piece of land, large enough to provide one of the main bearing pillars. If my initial designs go through, they will bulldoze it and relocate everyone." Ekrem didn't understand. "But why? We live here already. You can't just put a pillar here." "Because that's how we city people are," he sighed. "Where others see their entire livelihoods, we see a piece of land that could make travel more convenient." "I understand," Ekrem nodded, not understanding. He decided there were more pressing matters at hand. "We shouldn't waste time talking. If you want to make it, we need to move now," he added, trying to sound as serious as possible, like an adult. Mr. Ufrat seemed to agree, and so they paddled on. Ekrem showed the man a few tricks on how to stay more silent and not attract the alligators. The swamp was dangerous during the night, and some of the creatures prowling in it this hour could do terrible things to those foolish enough to attract them. They paddled and paddled for hours on end, navigating slow currents and around islands, always on and on and on. Ekrem was getting very tired, but there was no time to rest. His arms felt like pudding, but crossing the swamp required determination, and he needed to be strong for Mr. Ufrat. Kansu was always around, scouting and warning him of alligators and mud bars by clicking 2 or 3 times respectively. He awoke from the ear-shattering roar of engines. A blinding white floodlight illuminated the surrounding swamp. It reached into every crack and crevice, even a few meters into the murky water. Hot air blasted from the gunship hovering above, worse than a dry storm in summer. "Pick up your paddles and slowly move to the shoreline," the loudspeakers somehow managed to drown out even the engines. On a small island nearby, the Mutaween soldiers wearing green takias were waiting for them. Still slightly drowsy and weak, Ekrem obeyed the commands coming from the speakers and made it on land, Mr. Ufrat in tow. "Who are you?" asked one of the soldiers, pointing at Ekrem. Kansu dropped out of the foliage above, landing on the soldier, who fell to the ground and cursed. His partners pointed their barrels at Kansu, but did not fire for fear of hitting their colleague. who was now wrestling with the powerful masked dog on the ground. Kansu had his tail wrapped around the man's leg and was trying to bite his throat with his pincers, but the soldier was holding the animal back with his forearm. He reached down to a holster on his hip, pulled out a handgun, and with a loud bang, he shot Kansu in the head. "No!" Ekrem screamed, running over to his friend. One of the soldiers pulled him back by the collar and held him in a gridlock. Mr. Ufrat was now pointing a machine gun at the Mutaween. The one who fought Kansu must have let it slip, and in the commotion everyone had forgotten about their prisoner for a moment too long. "Put down the weapon!" the Mutaween shouted. "Put it the fuck down, faggot!" Ufrat's face was a grimace of panic. It was clear he didn't know what to do. The barrel lit up as he fired a shot, but the Mutaween soldiers were quicker, and Ufrat went down in a hail of bullets, falling backward into the swamp water. The weapons made a high-pitched whizzing sound. These could not be good men. They killed his friend, and now they killed a man who was only protecting himself. Ekrem bit the arm that was holding him with all his might, and the headlock broke with a surprised curse. He spun around and sprinted towards Hashim's kayak. There was a dull pain in the back of his head, followed by darkness. He awoke in a tiny, cold room with polished concrete walls. Lying on a hard bed with a thin blanket, he felt his head to find it bandaged. Surprisingly, touching it did not hurt, and he was feeling lightheaded instead of feeling like his skull was about to burst, like the last time he was hit in the head after falling off a tree. There was no sound, absolutely nothing but his breathing. No insects whirring past, no alligators growling, no boggims hissing, no bubbles surfacing. Just silence. Absolute, deafening silence. How long he lay there, awake and staring at the grey ceiling, Ekrem could not tell. His mind was completely empty. He knew it should have been racing, worrying about his family, or about where he was, or if he was going to be executed now. But it didn't. The metal door swung open with a creak. Behind it stood a uniformed man with stern eyes, wearing a gold-rimmed red fez. "You are a vile boy, Ekrem Ayvas. You've insulted God by helping a devil man, and you have brought great shame upon your family," he said. His voice sounded like it was coming out of a cave. "You are also a very lucky boy. Mufti Barak decided you should not be punished, but instead be given a chance to atone for your sinful behavior. Make it right, so that you may one day, on the last of days, enter God's kingdom of heaven after all." The man walked into the room and threw a small, unadorned grey fez at Ekrem. "Put this on and come meet your new brothers. You're a janissary now, and you must do the Prophet proud." This was an original short story by Gideon J.M.F. Weber, as narrated by the author. If you want more of this, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel or follow the blog, where you can also find read-only versions with no audio, in case that's what you want. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you for your support. Have a great day.